Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Valero Texas Open. Gonna go through everything you need to know about the TPC San Antonio Oaks course, including a look at, first off, just some of the course details, get us all on the same page when it comes to this track. Then we'll go hole by hole, give you a real taste of what these players are going to be facing, and then towards the end of the video, gonna go through some of my key stats for the week, some of the stats, some of the sort of metrics that I'm weighing a little bit more in my modeling this week, and then afterwards, a few comp courses around the PGA Tour that should play similar to the conditions expected this week and that you might want to use for some of that crossover analysis. So by the end, you'll have all the information that you need to get your research started to go out there and have yourself a week for this Valero Texas Open. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with some of those course details I mentioned before. The Oaks course is a par 72 and really one that's about average in terms of its length. We've got ourselves a 7,438 yard golf course, and some of your par threes are actually some of your longer holes. So when we take a look at the par fours, you'll find a few where you're hitting a lot of wedges, and then some from 475 to 500 yards that are going to be a little bit more beefy to contain. So there's a good mix of long irons that you have to hit around this track, but also a lot of those scoreable holes, especially the par fours, where you're going to be hitting wedge maybe 125 yards and in. So it's a golf course that, has some scoreable spots. 17 might be drivable out there for rounds 3 and 4. You also have the 4 par 5s with this par 72 setup. So you can go out there and score. You can go out there and shoot -8 like you saw from Corey Connors in round 1 last year, but you're going to have your best stuff. And it's not just the fact that you have some length out here at this golf course. You got some tight driving areas, some oaks, some forested areas where you can really get into trouble. Not a ton of water like you see at most of these Texas style golf courses, but around the green shots that are among the most difficult in all the PGA Tour. And being just 1 week before Augusta National and the Masters, it's a great little tune-up for what to expect out there with the undulations, the fast greens that we get out here this time of year. It's a real good test to have the week before that first major. So those are some of the course details to start it off. Your average green size is 6,400 square foot, so about your tour average when it comes to the size of your greens. But as I mentioned, really fast, a ton of undulation out there on the green complexes, so they tend to play pretty tough out there. Your bunkers, you have 64 on property, which is, again, a pretty typical number for what we see on a tour course. Only 3 water hazards in play. And in terms of our agronomy, we have POA overseeded greens. Everything is going to be a ryegrass elsewhere, so the same kind of grass situation that we've had for the last month and a half at this stage. And there hasn't been much changes out there from 2023 into 2024. So when we take a look at the stats over the last 3 years, this isn't a tournament that has moved from one part of the year to another. It's been pretty consistently towards this part of the schedule. Sometimes the WGC match play is mixed in the week before this. This time around, it was the Texas Children's Open. So it's pretty typical tournament. I'm expecting similar conditions to the last 3 years. And we started off last year with a lot of fog, a lot of humidity out here in the area, which led to some lower scores earlier on. And the same thing is going to happen this week. In fact, out here on Monday, they were calling for some isolated thunderstorms out there. And we'll have to double check if they actually get hit by that moisture. But if they get that humidity right before the tournament starts, a lot of these averages are going to look the same. So your fairway average was still a little bit lower than your tour average. As I mentioned, some real tight driving corridors out there. Your green regulation average was about 5% lower than your tour average. Not really the green size that was causing that, more so the undulation on the greens, as well as the firmness that you get at a Texas-style golf course. Scrambling rate was about the tour average, which is a little bit surprising given how hard the surrounds can be around here. But when we take a look at the leaderboards, if you take a look at some of your champions at this event, it becomes extremely obvious that around the green matters. Your 3-putt average slightly higher than normal, as you'd expect with greens that are as difficult as they are here. Your birdie average lower than normal. Your bogey average slightly higher than what you have for a field average out there. And the real difficulty here, you can see the par 3s, they're listed as about tour average in terms of their difficulty. There's one that's a lot easier than the rest, but you're going to have 200 plus yard approaches into all 4 of the par 3s out there. So a lot of that depends on tee boxes. Sometimes they move them up. One of them can play as long as 250 yards out there, but if they move it up, 2, sometimes even 3 tee boxes like they tend to do, it's not going to play as difficult from that angle. So I would say a course that is sneaky hard yard, right? It's not overly long. It doesn't have a ton of 500+ yard par fours, but it's gonna be a death by 1,000 paper cuts. You're gonna have a lot of real tough around the green shots if you're missing greens all day. And as you can see with the slightly below average fairway and green rates, that's a common occurrence around the TPC and San Antonio course. So if you go to back some of the past champions, you'll see some of those around the green players showing up. So you got like Benny Ann, who's real skilled around the green. Matt Kuchar, maybe the best example, right up there finishing in third. But like a Ches Reavie up there. If we go back to the year before that, JJ Spawn won. But Matt Jones, Matt Kuchar again, right? Two players that are known for that short game ability. Troy Merritt, right? Charles Howell III. What we're not seeing up here are a lot of bomb and gouge type of players, right? We're not getting the Cameron Champs, those elite tier distance players, right up here in the top 10. It's much more those plotter type of players, right? Really solid short games. You get a few hot putters that show up, right? Like a, Bo Hostler, for example, just tore up the course on the greens out there. Matt Kuchar, same thing a few years ago. But even last year, right? It's not a bunch of green over here in the off the tee. So this is much more about just keeping yourself in position than it is going out there and overly dominating with the ball striking. So approach is still going to matter, right? You're going to see a lot of dark green on these leaderboards over here from the shots gained approach perspective, but where it's maybe a little bit less important this week would be off the tee with the distance. And then I'd say the putting at this course is slightly de-emphasized, right? Last year, Corey Connors won this event, just hardly gaining with the flat stick. Sure, you had your poppers like a Sam Stevens, right? A Sam Ryder that got it done with the putter, but somebody like Benny Ann, for example, right? Lost strokes with the flat stick, yet still finished in the top 6, right? Patrick Rodgers finished in 5th place last year. Normally a really good putter, but just hardly gained with the flat stick all week. It's the kind of golf course where you can do that. And if we go to the year before that, you'll see the same kind of thing. Right? JJ Spawn did gain with the putter, but it was only 3/4 of a stroke per round, right? We're not talking about an elite level putting performance there. You had guys like, who was it? Adam Hadbin that lost strokes with his putter out there and still finished in the top 5. Same thing with Charles Howell III. And you can see Keegan Bradley down there, pretty on brand for him, right? Much more of a ball striker than a solid putter. Was also a player that top 10'd at this golf tournament without gaining with that flat stick. So if we go back 3 years ago, just take a look at one more sample, right? Jordan Spieth up there did gain strokes with the flat stick, but then you also had guys like Matt Wallace, right? Lose nearly 0.2 strokes per round there, yet still finished up there in the top 3, right? And Lucas Glover, for example, that had, a pretty average putting week out there, carried himself to the top 5 with that precision and ball striking. So it's all about the approach play. Almost every event on tour, right? You're going to have to go out there and hit your irons. But I think what separates yourself outside of that this week is keeping yourself in play, right? Not making mistakes off the tee, and then having that stout short game to save yourself when you do end up missing. So you can see back there 3 years ago, right? Around the green was real important, right? A few guys down towards the T6 range, maybe not getting it done as much in that category, but we go back there 2 years ago, right? A lot of green in this around the green, right? Especially with like a JJ Spawn that won. Guys like who was Keegan Bradley, Matthias Schwab gained a bunch of strokes around the green. And then last year, Corey Connors was just a slight gainer, right? More so just ball striked the heck out of this golf course. Same thing with Sam Stevens, right? He actually lost strokes around the green, but the rest of this top 10 almost are all gaining, right? You have somebody like Hayden Buckley that's losing about a half a stroke per round, but the vast majority of them at least kept their rounds together, which is kind of hard to do around this golf course. If you're not a real skilled around the green player, you can get exposed at this kind of track. And those are some of the trends that we've seen at this golf course. So we'll talk about the kind of key stats, modeling that I'm using this week to identify our top plays. But those are a few of the course details to consider before going out there and selecting players for this golf course. Now we'll go hole by hole and give you an idea of the types of shots that these players are going to be facing. So first off, hole number 1 is not quite as much of a handshake as what you'd be hoping for, and sometimes ends up playing into the wind. So when that happens, this plays nearly 500 yards. It's a real severe green. Anything to the left, you're dealing with a lot of slope down to almost every single pin location. And then over here to the right, you can't really get a full appreciation from some of the overhead views, but there's a lot of slope here. Your ball's going to funnel the whole way down here, about 15, sometimes even 20 yards off the green, making it one of the harder around the green shots on the entire golf course. So that's an idea, right, of that challenge around the green. But it also comes in on the par 5s, right? So something I think that is maybe not talked about enough around TPC San Antonio, the fact that the par 5 fives are super long, right? Nearly 600 yards, some of them well over 600 yards. So even your elite tier distance players are usually not hitting the surface in 2. So to make birdie at these, you really have to be a solid wedge player, right? If you're shorter, you're not going for it in 2. Or second off, have a really good around the green game where you're good with those like 30, 40 yard pitches. If you hit into one of these bunkers, right, getting close to that pin location is going to be how you do a lot of your scoring this week. And if you take a look at the past champions here, Corey Connors did it once again last year. Before last year, it was like the last 5 champions were the best on the par 5s that week. And last year, if Corey Connors wasn't number 1 in par 5 scoring, it was definitely up there in the top 5 as the champion. And I think that's a good idea for why, right? And especially why the around the green matters here. I mean, you don't want to be missing all day, right? You don't want to be missing greens and gaining strokes around the green on the regular. But on these par 5s, those are some of the scoring clubs, right? These around the green shots are where you're going to make a lot of those birdies on a par 72. Hole 3 is 216 yards. It is an example of one of the harder par 3s at this golf course. They don't all have water in play, but they're almost all extremely lengthy, like what you have here with hole number 3, and a lot of slope here when you miss the green that can make it difficult to get up and down, and it's hard just to 2-putt out there at that hole. Hole 4 is 487, another one of the longer holes. So as you can tell from the start, not really an easy, set of first 4 holes. One scoreable look with the par 5, scoreable look here with hole number 5, which is also a little bit shorter, right? Sub 400 yards. But you're also going to have those real tricky holes mixed in as well. So it's a good start out here. This is a wedge, a birdie look for most players. And it gives you a good idea of the different strategies that work around here, right? Like if you look at the past champions, it's not a lot of those power players, because where you can make your hay, where you can score out here, right, are on those par 5s with those around the green shots. Maybe it is a wedge out there in the par 5 as well. And then hole 5, a lot of these shorter par 4s, being able to score when you get a shorter club in hand. Hole 6 is another example, right, of one of the easier holes out here. If you can hit a good drive, which is tough with this kind of angle, this kind of dogleg action from right to left. But if you hit the fairway, you got a little wedge shot in, right? About 100 yards, maybe 110 yards, and you should be able to hit it close. Hole 7, tough, right? Longer par 3. This is a double green that is shared with the first par 5 that we have. So over here, right, was hole number, I believe, 2 or 3 out there. And then it's shared with hole number 7, the longer par 3. The hardest pin is over here in the middle right, where you have this huge slope over the green. A lot of players will leave it short. It's a pretty simple 2-putt if you do that. So that's probably the smart play when you have this middle to back pin location. But with all that slope there, the ball is going to trickle off like 15 to 20 yards, which makes it extremely difficult to get up and down. Hole 8 is 613 yards, another one of the super lengthy par 5s. Your elite tier players might get it up near the green in 2 if they have that sort of power, but a lot of your guys will be laying up here, maybe hitting it like 50, 60 yards short of the green, and then trying to access some of those pin locations. Hole 9 is 478, another long par 4. So as you can tell here, there's not like any 450-yard par 4s, right? They're all either scoreable, like 400 yards, or they're like nearly 500 yards. So it's a lot of tough holes, a lot of easy holes mixed in. Kind of reminds me of the US Open out there in LA, where you had that similar type of setup. If you happen to start in hole number 10, you do get a mid-length par 4 to start with, and it is a much, much easier starting hole for a majority of rounds around TPC San Antonio. Hole 11 is 418 yards, a scoreable look, especially if you can hit this fairway, but yet another example of the tough tee shots that are required around here that you really can't miss more than 10 yards offline. Right? You miss left, you're in the trees. You miss right, you're in one of these bunkers. If you hit the fairway, though, it's a little flip wedge in. Hole 12 is 417, so yet again, another shorter par 4. So you best go out there and hit a solid wedge. Try and get that to within 10 feet. Hole 13 is 246, the longest par 3 on property. No water here, right, like you had with the first par 3, but still an extremely tricky shot. Hole 14 is 574. Of the par 4s, this is by far the most reachable in 2. And your longer hitters can try and bite off a little bit more of this dog leg. So, if we go over here to the tee, you can see you can take a slightly more aggressive line out there over here towards the right. But even if you don't, you should probably get it up near the green in 2 anyways. Hole 15 is 469, so another longer par 4, maybe not as brutal as some of the other ones that are like 480, 490, but still pretty difficult hole. 16 is 193, the shortest par 3, also the wackiest with a literal bunker in the center of the green complex. A ton of undulation to deal with there, and obviously if you miss on the other side of the bunker, it is extremely difficult up and down. Hole 17 is a hole that they can make drivable. So what they'll do here for, I think, rounds 3 and 4, that's what they did last year here at this event, is they use this front right tee box. And from there, it's about a 310-yard hole. A lot of players will be going for it off the tee. But from back here, it's still really good birdie luck, right? You hit a 3-wood, maybe a driver off the tee if you want to be more aggressive about it, and leave yourself a real short shot in. Finally, 18 is 610 yards. This is another real hard par 5, right? It's lengthy as hell out here, and it's going to be hard to go 4 and 2. You've got this creek down the right, which gobbles up a ton of golf balls, and unless you're down 2 with the last hole in the event, or somebody that needs to make the cut and make an eagle to do so, you're not going to see a ton of people go for it. So, there's been a lot of players in the past that have tried to get it up there and have paid the price over there in the water, and I think the smart play, the play you're going to see a lot more players do, especially if you miss that fairway, it's just hit it over here to that second white stake and have some sort of a wedge in. It's a great finishing hole. You got the resort back here to the back left, whole build out around hole number 18, and a real fun tournament, real fun golf course, right? A lot of holes where you can see yourself making bogey, and then plenty of holes, especially some of the shorter par 4s, where you're looking to go out there and make birdie. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through some of our modeling this week and the key stats I'm using to identify my top plays. So first thing I'm going to look at here is shots gained approach, and they're always going to include this in our modeling, right? It's something that Bet the Number is using in a 15% model rank this week, and honestly, in my modeling, I'm probably going to consider it a little bit more, but they're looking at the last 24 rounds over here in Bet the Number, the same kind of sample that I'm looking at, and just by the way, shout out to Bet the Number out there, has been extremely useful out there for these course breakdowns. Make sure to check it out yourself if you're looking for access to the same kind of stats that I use over here on these previews, a lot of the course breakdown stuff, comp courses I'm looking at, just the best database for my money out there in the industry. Of course, I partner with the channel here. It's super clutch, and you can customize this all you want, right? So for example, over here, right, when I'm going and running my modeling, right, I'm going to bump up this approach number, right? So they got it at about 15%. Now they have a lot of different approach stats mixed in, like green regulation percentage. They also have a few proximity buckets, right? So 100 to 100, 200 yards, also 250, right, mixed into here. So that's how they're getting that additional exposure, right? In fact, you can see between these 3 categories, that's another 25% that they're adding. Now, I'm still probably going to look at things like green regulation, maybe that 250 plus yard range, but regular old shots gained approach is usually my bread and butter when it comes out there to making my custom models. So maybe I'll be a little bit heavier out here on this just regular last 24 rounds, but some of your leaders there would be a Keith Mitchell, Corey Connors, Joel Damon with that resurgence, also Ryan Moore playing some really solid golf. But guys like Austin Eckroat have low-key, right, been going out there, been very consistent with that iron play. Christian Bezainhout has been doing it all of 2024. Matsuyama, right, has back to his ball striking ways. In fact, from tee to green has been one of the best players in the field, if not the best player over the last 24 rounds. Victor Perez, perennial flusher. Same thing with Davis Thompson, players we expect to see here every single time. Doug Gim, EVR, right, have made it a habit, right, showing up here in the shots gained approach category. But as we typically do, right, regardless of golf course, the iron play coming in is going to be an extremely important metric, right? It is the most consistent stat that we have from round to round on tour, also from event to event on tour. It is the most predictive stat out of all of the shots gained metrics that we have at our disposal. So I think at any golf course, right, you'd be a fool not to look at shots gained approach, but especially at a difficult track around the green. When you miss the green complexes here, which are about average in size for the PGA Tour, you're going to feel it. You have a lot of slope, a lot of speed to deal with, and players that aren't solid around the green often get exposed. We'll talk about around the green in a sec. That is going to be extremely important at this kind of golf course. But the next stat I'm looking at, and this actually wasn't included on the Valero Texas Open model here, so I was a little bit surprised to see that, but driving accuracy to me is an extremely important metric. There are a lot of really nasty natural areas you can get into, right? You've got those oaks, little forest out there, but also some cactuses, some bushes out there, some desert type of wildlife that makes it extremely difficult when you get offline. So if you're just looking at regular driving accuracy stuff, guys like Ryan Moore show up again, so I think he's potentially worth a look as a sleeper play. Also has a 3rd place finish in 2019 and a 7th place back in 2018 to his record. But let's look at a few more. Nate Lashley, Aaron Rai showing up, also a really good iron player. Pretty much every golf course fits Aaron Rai's game, so he's going to show up in pretty much every week regardless of how you're running your model. But Ryan Palmer, Doug Gim showing up here, Alex Noren, extremely accurate off the tee. Same thing with guys like a Zach Blair, Alexander Bjork, are all players that would get a boost out there in my modeling, and it'll probably be about a 10, maybe 15% weighting out there in mine. I care about off the tee accuracy here, and if you look at some of your past champions, you'll see that reflected with them. Guys like JJ Spawn, an elite tier accuracy player, Corey Connors, of course, way back in the day, guys like Brandon Steele winning this. A lot of your past champions, a lot of guys with form like Matt Kuchar, right? I mean, look at this form: T3, T2, T12, T7 over the last 4 years. Are guys that keep it in play off the tee, right? Multiple time champion Corey Connors is one of the most accurate players in all the PGA Tour. A lot of your cheaper players, like a Brandt Snedeker, right, is kind of more of a plotter than he is an elite tier accuracy guy. A player that gets it done with the wedges around this kind of golf course. Zach Johnson, right, T13, 5th place back there 5 years ago, is a player that I believe has also won around this golf course in the past. Get it done with that accuracy and those wedges. So I think that there's a few different ways to get it done around here, and at least in my modeling, driving accuracy percentage is probably going to be a pretty big deal with what I'm working with. Next up, let's look at around the green, and what they've done over here in Bet the Number, which I love. They've actually just done it for us. It's something that I would have done otherwise if they weren't already doing it for us, is filtering all the around the green stats by the agronomy that we have this week. So taking golf courses with this rye overseed, these Poa trivalist greens, and then only looking at a player's success out of those kind of conditions. So you can see on here they have all of them selected, and what I love is that they took out Memorial Park because the rough was so short, right? You still have like a 2.5-inch rough this week as opposed to the non-existent rough out there last week. So I love what they're doing here. Courses like TPC Scottsdale are very similar around the green. Got courses like TPC Sawgrass, another one of these players, the Players Club venues, right, have a similar type of style around the green. Are all courses that we can look at. So if we're just looking at that agronomy, those type of golf courses, these are the best players around the green. So you got guys like Zach Blair up there, Ben Griffin showing up, Aaron Baddeley, really good around the green players. Guys like Hideki Matsuyama show up, which is important to note, right? He's killing it in every category that we're looking at. Robbie Sheldon, Matt Kuchar, right? A player that perennially goes out there and plays well with this type of agronomy. Not a surprise that he has the track record at this course. Guys like Taylor Montgomery, should say. Brendan Todd, really solid around the green. Lucas Glover, who also has a good track record around here. You can see, right, that T18 4th place, 14th place back there in 2019. I'll get a boost in my modeling here. And Benny Ann, another guy who has a really good track record here, right? A couple top 7 finishes to his name. Mav McNeely's been playing a lot better golf of late, is another guy who excels with this type of agronomy situation. Jordan Spieth showing up, of course, a winner back there 3 years ago, are all the types of guys that, maybe are doing it a little bit better. Now for the bad part, right? Let's look at the guys that leak strokes around the green on these green complexes. So Victor Perez might be in for a little bit of a rude awakening after some of the solid form. Cameron Champ might be coming back down to earth, right? With a missed cut with that around the green situation. Guys like Nick Hardy, Chesson Halley, Davis Riley are all going to get a huge negative this week. And believe it or not, your champion here, right, Corey Connors, has not been good around the green lately, right, out here with this type of agronomy. So I'd be a little bit worried about Corey coming into this, right? I know he's won this event twice, so, we got to give him a little bit of a break when it comes to some of the around the green stats here. But all of these guys, right, that are losing like over a third of a stroke per round on this type of agronomy are going to put a huge red flag up. So you got guys like Keith Mitchell, right, that aren't playing very good around the green here. The one guy that I'll give an excuse to, right, would be Corey Connors, right, because of that course history angle. But somebody like a Keith Mitchell, right, he's gone T17, T26, despite going out there and being really, really good with the ball striking both times around. Right, shots gained tee to green, right, with a T26 finish, he gained 9.6 strokes tee to green, and he gained over 2.7 the time before that back there in 2021. Just say time after that, I should say. The putting and the around the green has held him back, right? It was the putter back there in 2018, right? He lost strokes around the green last year, was the one category that he wasn't able to gain with. kind of worry about that for Keith Mitchell at this kind of golf course. So a few other players of note, right? Johnny Vegas, not very good around the green. Chandler Phillips, same kind of story. Akshay Bhatia, another top end player. Austin Eckroat, another guy that kind of struggles around the green with this type of agronomy. Same thing with like Billy Ho, right? Ludwig Aberg. Players that get a slight ding. They're not guys that you have to fade just because of the around the green stuff, but I would certainly rather see them gaining. Few stats that maybe don't matter as much to me. Now, one would be shots gained putting, but what I do like about what the bet the number's doing here, and you have to include putting, right? You can't just completely ignore it for any given event. So you can see they have it at about 15% right there, and that's the only putting that they have. So that's going to be about the same type of modeling weighting that I'm working with there. So I'm spot in line with what bet the number's doing. So I love that. Is they filtered it to only the courses with this POA Trivalous overseed. So they could have included Memorial Park if they wanted to, but the last 2 years ago, 3 years before that, right, would have been just Bermuda grass greens. So you don't want to be pulling data from the wrong golf courses. So that's why they took it out of there. But we're looking at TPC San Antonio. So this course, Innisbrook, TPC Sawgrass, Scottsdale, Pete Dye Stadium course are all courses that run with the same type of agronomy. So if you're just looking at putting stats on these type of tracks, you got Sam Ryder up there gaining well over a stroke per round. Taylor Montgomery again showing up, who just on these types of courses, right, with this type of agronomy has been amazing with the short game, right, gaining 1.5 strokes per round. That is next level stuff. Ben Griffin really likes this agronomy, right? Again, gaining over 1.6 strokes, nearly 1.7 strokes when it comes to the short game stuff. Brendan Todd, all these players that are showing up in both categories clearly like this style of golf. So in Aaron Baddeley, you can say that about Matt Kuchar, right, showing up in both categories. Mav McNeely clearly likes this type of grass. Jordan Spieth, Denny McCarthy, right? All these short game kind of players. I normally am not all about the short game, right? I'm all about the ball striking, tee to green stats. That's normally what I preach out here. But if you're a player that is gaining both around the green and putting on these types of courses, I love that at this type of golf course. Now, the approach play would be a nice thing to have too. So Sam Ryder, of course, right, has the approach play, but not the around the green play. But let's find somebody that has all three. Like Matt Kuchar, right, doesn't have all three, right, because he's losing with the approach play there. Let's see if we can find anyone. Bazainhood, I guess, right? Not the biggest gainer around the green, but has two of those three categories. If you find yourself, a player that gains in all three of these stat categories, they're going to be the absolute nuts this week. But I can tell you, there's not many to choose from, right? Even Adam Scott Ray is just gaining under 0.2 strokes per round when it comes to the around the green play. It's really hard to find that kind of hidden gem, right? Diamond in the rough per se out there. So guys like Andrew Novak, right, are gainers in all three categories, but kind of like Michael Kim as well, right, are just slight gainers around the green. If you have guys that are solid in two of the three categories, that's probably enough for me to get exposure to them this week. But those are the main stats that I'm looking at. And again, maybe I'm a little bit heavier on driving accuracy than some of the other people out there. It's just when we went hole by hole, right, you saw the difficulty there off the tee. That's what I'm trying to avoid with players, are those natural areas, a lot of those big numbers that could come up, and trying to keep my players in position. And now for some comp courses I'm looking at this week. So first off, we got the Innisbrook Copperhead course, home of the Valspar Championship. Track we saw just a few weeks ago, so we have a lot of recent data to work with here, and it's another golf course where you don't have to have that length off the tee. I mean, sure, you had guys like Cam Young show up, but also Peter Malnati, right? Mackenzie Hughes, Chandler Phillips, Adam Hadman, Ryan Moore, all players that aren't known for that distance, show up there in the top 5, top 10. So it's a golf course where it's much more about the precision than it is that power off the tee. It's another track where it's harder than normal, right, in terms of fairways, greens. Your birdie average is lower, your bogey average is higher than we have on tour. Same exact agronomy situation as what we're going to have for this golf tournament, and greens that can be pretty tricky as well. So, when we're looking for players there, right, we care about around the green. It's maybe not as important as what we have at this golf course, but the ball striking situation is eerily similar across track to track. And then when you add in the fact that it has the same exact type of grass, similar part of the schedule, right, when it comes to the golf tournament, is why I think it is such a good comparison. Next up, we're going to have the Stadium stadium course, and that's going to be for the WM Phoenix Open. So this is another course where maybe power is a little bit more useful around this TPC Scottsdale. It's not a longer course, right? It's also par 71 and only about 7,260 yards. But from the skill set perspective, we need iron players, right? That is going to be commonplace across all of these comps. But driving accuracy matters, right? Keeping yourself in the short stuff to apply spin to golf balls. And then what I really like about the WM is the around the green shots are extremely tricky, right? Some of the hardest greens to get up and down on a tour. You first off have that tricky agronomy situation around the green, but a ton of slope and really fast greens out there in the desert. So when we take a look at the leaderboard there, right around the green this year, you can see was maybe a little bit de-emphasized with the conditions that we have. But we go back there a few years ago, we see a lot more green right back there 2 years ago. In fact, almost everyone in the top 10 gained strokes around the green that year, outside of a Terrell Henn. Go to the year before that, same thing, right? Most of these guys were gaining around the green, but where you see a lot of green on these, right, is off the tee, right? You see a lot of green off the tee with these top 5 finishers at this event. And the approach play is always dark green, right? Regardless of what event we're looking at. So I think mostly a good comp around the green, but in general, these TPC style golf courses all play pretty similar when it's all said and done. And then the last comp I'll use is going to be the Cognizant Classic, and I would say it's the weakest out of the bunch, right? It's why I have it as my number 3 comp course, but it's another course with the same type of grass that doesn't favor the bombers, right? Cognizant Classic, you have a lot of wedges. It's much more about being precise than it is powerful off the tee, and you've seen a lot of shorter hitters find success. So sure, Minwoo, guys like EVR, right, hit it a long way, but Eckroat, David Skin, Shane Lowry, right? Sure, Cam Young, a bomber, but if we go back to the year before that, right, you'll find even more players that weren't super long off the tee. Now, I can't bring up the stuff because it was a different name, right? Honda Classic. So the database, doesn't equate those two events quite yet. But this is yet again another course where it's more about the precision than it is the power. Hard around the green shots, I would say pretty similar around the green shots to what we're going to get this week, and similar part of the schedule, once again, right, with the same type of agronomy. So a few courses that you can use for that crossover analysis, but my favorite by far has to be the Valspar Championship because it pretty much simulates exactly what we're going to get for this week. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Go ahead, smash that like button on the way out of here, and also subscribe so you don't miss any of the content to come. We'll be doing course breakdowns for all the golf tournaments this year, but if you haven't seen it already, if you just only watch my course breakdowns, I also do plenty of fantasy embedding content for every single event. My DFS embedding preview dropping a little bit later on this evening, going through a few of the different modeling aspects that I'm refining before lock, and then more importantly, a lot of my top plays for this week. So a few guys in DFS that I'll be getting well over the field on, and some outright bets, some top 5s, some top 10s that I'm mixing in across the board. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. Subscribe so you don't miss that video when it drops, as well as my weekly live stream Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be going through a lot of the last second details that you need for this week, including a look at the weather, any of your live questions. We'll go through some of the strategy for building lineups, a way to attack the prop board, underdog and prize picks, all the information that you need regardless of the tour event that we're at. So stoked for this week. 1 week to go until we get to Augusta National and the Masters. Let's go ahead and make it a good one.